Good afternoon and welcome to all our participants. My name is George Robertson and I'm a director at VanderMerwe and Robertson Attorneys. I have the privilege of hosting our session again today. Please feel free to use the Q&A button and to submit any questions during the session. We will look at the questions and try to answer most of them. We're also recording the session and will distribute it to all the participants tomorrow. You will see that we changed the name of our weekly session to True Normal. The reason for this is because we believe that there will be a new normal in our society post-COVID, and this will certainly have an impact on our family life and our businesses. And this impact is exactly what we try to understand with these weekly sessions. What will the new true normal be? We have the privilege of having Professor Fava Neves as a guest speaker this afternoon. Prof is an international expert in global food, agribusiness, and bioenergy strategies, and a part-time professor of planning and strategy at the School of Business of the University of Sao Paulo and FGV Business School, both in Brazil. He's an agronomic engineer. He has specialized in strategic planning processes for companies and food chains and works as a board member of both public and private organizations, being member of more than 10 international boards. He has published more than 100 articles in international journals and has been author and editor of 63 books published in 10 different countries. He is a fellow of IFAMA, the International Food and Agribusiness Management Association. Prof, thank you for joining us this afternoon, calling in from Brazil, and welcome to our forum. We also have Theo Vorster, Director of Galileo Capital, on the session, as always. Theo needs no introduction.
Hello, George.
Discussion.
Can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Theo.
Let me get just a few points that I think is important in terms of understanding why put Brazil into context. First of all, if you look at the population of Brazil, Brazil has about 210 million people, whereas South Africa's population is around about 58 million people. So on that score, the Brazilian population is 3.5 times the South African population. I think we need to appreciate that. So they are quite a bit bigger from a population point of view. If you, however, look at Brazil's GDP, that means the economic output of Brazil, it's roughly 1.9 trillion US dollars a year, whereas South Africa is about 370 million US dollars a year. So therefore, the Brazil's economy is roughly 5 times the size of the South African economy. So they're 3.5 times the number of people and about 5 times the population of South Africa, the GDP of South Africa. So the economy is quite a bit bigger. If you then take the GDP or the size of the economy on a per capita basis, Brazil's economy or the GDP per capita is roughly 40% higher than South Africa. So not only are there more people, the economy is quite a bit bigger, and on a per capita basis, the Brazilian economy is about 40% bigger than the South African economy. However, since we're now in the COVID era, and things like medical statistics is important, life expectancy in Brazil is roughly 10 years longer or older than South Africa. Our life expectancy is around 64 years old. That means that when a child at birth, they can expect to live to, on average, 64 years old. In Brazil, life expectancy is 75 years old. So what is important in that respect is that Brazil, from a medical point of view, and from a life expectancy point of view, the chance of getting older is much better than in South Africa. Marcos, are you now with us?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Oh, wonderful.
Well, first of all, Theo, let me thank you for inviting me to be with you guys this day. Wonderful chance to debate and to tell a little bit more of what's going on. We are facing tough times here in Brazil. Our life changed a lot since early February. And I think if we were chatting in December last year, and I would tell you that, you know, Theo, we're going to have a virus coming to the world, and we're going to have to stay inside our homes for 2 months, and then we're going to have to wear masks. And then in 2020, you are also going to see oil prices below zero, and you're going to see some other strange things. You would say, oh, let me finish this conversation because I found a crazy guy in the other part of the ocean, other side of the ocean, so there's no chance of dialogue. So I'm telling you that I've never seen this in my whole life, the change in the environment, the macro environment like we see now. Several losses of economic activity, losses of lives, losses of fun. I would be with you guys in South Africa now in July, opening the Agribusiness conference with my friend John Burgess. Unfortunately, everything was canceled. So we are facing a very, very unique times in our lives. And my message is we can learn something. So I can tell you a little bit more if you are interested. How are we performing here in Brazil in this crisis? And then talk a little bit of the learnings that I got myself, because a new normal, as you're calling, will start from now on. I don't have any doubts about this. Life will change, and I can talk a little bit more about the changes that I think, of course, if you are interested.
What I first want to start off with, Marcos, is just to give a perspective on currently where the numbers are in South Africa and perhaps where the numbers are in Brazil. Now, this is the statistics that as of yesterday, and this tries to show a few things. First of all, it aligns the starting points. So therefore, it accounts from roughly where the starting points can be aligned, and then the number of days from the starting point, and it's on a deaths per million of people. So in this respect, South Africa is currently around about 8 deaths per million people. At the same time, when we were at around about 8 deaths per million of people, Brazil was around about 70 deaths, but the United States at that point was at 200 deaths, and the UK was at 400 deaths per million people. If you then take a look at where we are now, on Brazil's case, we are roughly at 110 deaths per million people. The United States is at 300 deaths per million people, and the United Kingdom is at a number of 550 deaths per million people. So let's start the conversation, Marcos, with how are you experiencing this in Brazil?
Theo, thank you very much for this question. It's a tough times. We're facing a very challenging environment because just to start, we have something that's even worse than the situation that you have in South Africa, because when you compare the two countries, we have in Brazil the sanitary, the disease, the crisis, number one. We're still trying to understand the magnitude and the size of the first crisis. Then we have the economic crisis that's coming. A tsunami will hit our country, and we don't know the size of this wave yet. And differently from South Africa, we have a third crisis here in Brazil. That is the political crisis. Because you just had an election, and President Ramaphosa had a wonderful voting process. The society is united with your president. But here in Brazil, our election was very tight, and we still have a very divided society. So now it's a chance for the ones that lost to go against the current president. The current president also in his speeches does not contribute too much because he's very spontaneous and, you know, there's a lot of friction in the system. So we are having to deal with 3 crises here in Brazil. So how is our situation at this moment? You must understand that Brazil is a very large country. So we occupy half of South America. So imagine South Africa occupying half of the African continent. The first thing is that the situation in the country is very different when you go from one state to the other state, because it's a very large country. You have different incomes in the different states. So you have states that are performing very well, and you have states where we have disaster. And the management of the situation is at the state level. We have the federal government, of course, giving money, supporting people. They were very good at supporting the very poor with a voucher, a ticket that they could buy food. We are going now to the 3rd month of a voucher of around $150 per person. So this is allowing people to at least get the basics and continue surviving. So this is, let's say, at the level of the federal government. Then the state government are the ones that decide your freedom, what you can do, what you cannot do, the types of isolations that you have. So here in São Paulo, I live in São Paulo state, in the interior of the state. It's probably where we have the best situation in Brazil going on, because there's a lot of infrastructure. Our numbers are okay. And I can share a little bit with you the experience, because the city where I live is a 700,000 inhabitant city, and I was invited by the mayor to make part of the committee that helps the mayor to take the decision. So we have all the data online. Every day we have a report that measures the capacity of the hospitals, the intensive care units of the hospitals, the number of new cases, occupation rates, so we can decide a little bit better based upon data. Because this situation, this crisis was new for all of us. We were having to take decisions 2 months ago without data, without knowing what's the strategy. We have an objective that is to save maximum lives possible. But what's the best strategy to save maximum lives possible? We didn't have it. We had experiences from other countries, but what was, let's say, common sense is that we have to isolate people. So this was done here in Brazil. We kept working the food chains, the medical chains, some call it essential activities. Population could go outside home, but the shopping malls, everything was closed, but we can go outside to do exercises and these kind of things. Then we went to a second stage where we were obliged to use masks outside, and more education towards the sanitary measures, sanitary behavior of our population. And now we have starting the flexibility next Monday in our state. We are allowed now to let some activities come back. And I think life will start going normal again, but we are going to measure every day the amount of infections and the occupation of the hospitals that we have here. As soon as the numbers deteriorate, we have to come back again and isolate the population. So it's going to be a very tiny management of numbers and trying to acquire what is important today in case we don't have soon a vaccine or any kind of medicine. We have to search for herd immunity in order to get rid of this. So this is what we are going through now. To summarize, we have areas in Brazil that's a complete disaster. You can see in CNN televisions, because mostly they go to the disaster. They don't tell the good stories because, we know these don't sell. But here, for instance, we have had, unfortunately, 20 losses of people, 20 people in 700,000 inhabitants. We have hospitals with 25% occupation, so it's idle capacity at hospitals. This is why we can release a little bit better here. But in general, it is Theo, a very difficult moment here in Brazil because of the three crises. People are very aggressive. You know, some of them are not taking advantage of this crisis to learn, to improve as a person, putting more, you know, gasoline in the fire, and it's complicated here. But today, just to finish, I think I wouldn't use the strategy that Brazil uses. Now it's easy to say, but I would do something different, Theo. You know, I would put people 15 days in complete isolation so they can learn how dangerous this is. But then I would do a kind of releasing some activities with the education of all the controls before we did here. So, for instance, it wasn't necessary to close the car manufacturing business, the car retailers, because these activities could keep on working. So what I would do, I would change the situation. I would build up a matrix in this side, the importance of the activity for the economy, the impact for the economy, and here I would put risk of contamination. And then I would divide all the economic activities in these four boxes in this matrix, and I would have different policies according to the activity. An activity very important for the GDP of the country, for the jobs, for the income, and low risk of contamination, I would not shut down in our policy today. But again, Theo, today it's easy to say that. 2.5 months ago, when we started the process, you know, we had so many clouds that it wasn't possible to see what was going on. So I would do a more vertical approach to confine the ones that are much more vulnerable, but I would keep the cash generation of the country, because now, what's the size of the economic tsunami coming? We could make it smaller, hitting less our society. There's people telling us here that we may lose 10% of our GDP this year. You know, for Brazil, a country with all these inequality, it's going to be a complete disaster in terms of unemployment, in terms of hunger and other problems. So I would do a better management if we could come back now. And I was responsible for the decision in March 15th when we started all the isolation process.
Thank you, Marcos. I think to a large extent, a lot of that ties into where South Africa is. We might be behind you guys, but unfortunately, we're probably making the same mistakes that you are making in terms of shutting down the economy and using a very blunt instrument to manage the process instead of a smart instrument. And I think we mustn't underestimate the fact that the polarization of the politics that this can lead to, specifically amongst the people that are really struggling in a very unequal society. But let me get back then to Marcos. You said one of the sectors that was kept in place was the food value chain. How did that perform during this crisis? And then I also want to move to the food value chain international. South Africa is, as you know, an exporter of quite a big number of foods. We are having the second biggest maize crop in our history. Rand value wise, it will be the biggest one. The citrus farmers, we're the second biggest exporter of citrus in the world, behind Spain. And our citrus farmers are now nicely getting into step. So first of all, the food value chain within Brazil, how is that coping? And then how do you see the international food value chain?
Theo, first of all, I was in South Africa last year to launch this book here, The Orange Juice Chain. So I want to send my best regards to all the orange community in South Africa, and I'm very happy they are able to perform well together with Agribusiness in South Africa. You know, what's happened here in this last 3 months was an incredible gain in the image of the food and agribusiness sector within our society, because they kept working. They guaranteed shelves in the supermarkets completely full, so we didn't have lack of any types of products here in Brazil. They suffered some losses because, you know, the chains, specific chains that sell to the food service, they had a huge impact, like the flour chains that needs the events to go on. They had a huge loss. The milk chain, horticultural chain, all the ones that are strongly directed to the restaurant business, they had a loss. They were able to stand up again, to supply to supermarkets and to make things work. So agribusiness here in Brazil had a huge gain in the image amongst our society, and it's working well. We are having a record crop this year, 252 million tons. The amount of income will be also records when you multiply the volume of the crops with the prices. And agriculture gained a huge competitive advantage in the last last 3 months, let's say, because our currency devaluated 30% because of all these crises. So, you know, part of our costs, of course, are in dollars, so they impact the production costs of farmers, but part are in the real, the local currency. So now the exports of Brazil are booming. China is coming, buying meat, buying grains, other Asian countries. Some countries also, Theo, that have problems with their supply chains inside them are opening their markets for Brazil. So we had yesterday the first exports going to Thailand in beef, in meat, Egypt. So several countries that we had the problems in our trade because of some kinds of barriers, they came and started the agreements in the last, let's say 30 or 60 days because they're needing food. We had also cases that you heard about of interruption of food chains in China, in the US because of contaminations, and here in Brazil is relatively controlled. Our slaughterhouses are smaller than the US and they are very diversified in the country, so the supply can work if we have specific problems with some of these. But I think it's the same in South Africa. Andre Yost, John Purchase are talking with me and some Justin Chadwick that you're facing some difficulties, but it's working well. At the beginning, Theo, I was a little bit afraid because we had some, you know, the labor unions took advantage, had some opportunistic behavior in some of our ports, and starting to talk about strikes. Then I was worried because imagine how delicate is the logistics of food. And if you start having logistic problems, we had 2 years ago, you heard about this, a truckers strike in Brazil that was a disaster, but the truckers kept working. You know, the restaurants were able to be very creative and build up the delivery systems, so they didn't shut down completely. And a lot of creativity came in food and agribusiness. So at this moment, of course, the agribusiness ship was hit by the coronavirus, but it's moving. And this year, probably the GDP of agribusiness in Brazil will grow by 2 or 3%, helping the country that will think maybe from 8 to 10%. So if it wasn't agribusiness, it would be a complete disaster now here in Brazil.
If you look internationally from a South African perspective, are you comfortable that the major export countries, and then I talk about the China or the major import countries, the UK specifically, are you comfortable that those supply chains will remain operational and that we kind of through the depth of the problems?
I think so, because there was a learning curve of how to keep them operational and working. So I think the major risks now are kind of measured. So what I think is we do have a brilliant future, the ones that are producing food. I'm an enthusiast of the organized food chains that you have in South Africa, because, you know, the trend, the structural trend keeps the same. Now we're facing a moment, 2020 will be in our history books, as a very unique period in our history. We're going to study this, but the structural trends, they keep the same. So we're still going to have 9 billion people in the planet. 80% will be in Asia, will be in Africa. So we still have the demand growing, which opens opportunities for the countries that are competitive. What may be a different thing now coming, and this may impact negatively South Africa and also Brazil as food exporters, food producers, is, well, we're going to have a cost increase because society will be much more worried with sanitary, traceability and these kind of safety issues for in our food chains. The second thing that may happen, although I don't believe too much, is kind of the old policies of self-sufficiency coming back again. So, now I have to produce my own wheat, I have to produce my own whatever, and then you do this in an inefficient way, full of subsidies, damaging the global trade of food and agribusiness. This is a risk we should consider, but I think it's not going to be reasonable for societies to produce things that they're not competitive. But we may have a wave of self-sufficiency coming back again, and this will threaten, of course, the exports of South Africa and also from Brazil. But in general, I'm still very positive of the global food markets. This year will be complicated because we don't know how much the damage will be in terms of the purchasing power of families. But you have to consider something that's very important. Food is the last thing that a family will cut. So we're not going to be hurt like, we're not going to get hurt like the tourism business, like, the service business, because families will have to tighten to cut some things, but the last thing they will cut is food. So as food producers, I think we're not going to be hit like the ones that are entertainment sellers and these kind of things that changed a lot in our lives. So I'm still very positive for food and agribusiness. This year will be complicated. Also all the biofuels projects were postponed this year because of oil prices going down in a way that we can't even believe, but they will come back. We are worried with the environment, and a lot of things will make us get on track again, maybe at the end of the last quarter of this year and 2021.
Marcos, you said specifically what a groundbreaking year this is and how people look back at this year and it'll change history. But from your perspective, there is a number of things that you believe will change permanently, a number of things that won't be the same after this. And you've actually looked at it quite carefully from your personal experience. What are those elements or those principles that you believe are going to change and might change permanently?
Okay, Theo. Well, I had, I'm a speaker, and I lost 30, 40 events that I was already hired for. So I had a lot of losses in terms of financial perspective in my life. And I've seen it's a very depressive moment also that we face in some days, because we see friends of us bankrupting. I have friends that are owners of restaurants, owners of other types of services. We have people here in Brazil that are losing their jobs. So it's not a nice moment, and we see a lot of lives being lost. So it's challenging, but we have to keep going, And I took advantage of this time here in my house to think more, to create a lot, and to see in all these tough moments, this tough situation, how can we learn something with this? And I think that we will come back as a different society from these days here. I hope we get out of this as soon as possible, because we don't want to see more people losing their lives because of this virus. So this is the topic number one. We need to save people. So we need to get out of this. I've not seen a way out yet, so it's still complicated. But that's the situation. And I thought about how can I organize my ideas, the time that I had to think about this during these days. So I kind of summarized the changes in 10 words. And if I have time, I would like to have 30 seconds to talk to you about these 10 words. And I hope these words can be useful for the ones that are listening us as a kind of a homework. So think about how you are going to change based upon these 10 words, and how your business will change. How can you improve, and how can you improve your business based on these 10 words? So the first one is digital. I've seen here, I teach at two of our best universities. They had to go, Theo, online in 2 weeks. A plan that was of 10 years. They had to do it in 2 weeks. Incredible. They were full of bureaucracy, all documentation, everything went digital now. We sign contracts, we control everything digital. So it's incredible how the digital life came in. So I had to tell you about education, medical care. Now we have digital care, medicals talking to patients in a digital way. It's possible. Why do we have to do everything physically? So there's a huge transformation towards the digital. At the beginning, I thought that our internet system would collapse here in Brazil, so I was very afraid. So imagine people having to stay at home with the network falling, but it's incredible, it's working well. So I think the digital would be the number one word, how the digital will change our lives. Delivery of entertainment, we have now the lives, and probably you have these going on in South Africa, of our singers, the people, the musicians. And it's so nice. You can go in their houses and you can watch, they changed the shows to the lives in the computer, and they are followed by 3 million people, 2 million people. And now they have the advertisement going on. They collect money for charity. It's so beautiful, so different. So the word number one is digital. It's a huge transformation coming about this one. The second would be home. So we were forced to stay at home. We learned that it's possible to do meetings using the way that we're doing now. We saw that it's possible to do a lot of things from our house. And Theo, what are the impacts that I see in this? So I used to do 100 flights per year. I'm not going to do these anymore. So, we're going just to specific events where physically you're required to be, but most meetings to deliver a project, to try to sell a consultancy or a proposal, you're going to do it this way. People learned how to do it this way. Even the public sector move it inside, and we can. What's the change that I can tell you? We don't need any more those large offices. Companies are having huge plans to downsize here in Brazil the amount of offices, and also people, because they saw that home office worked well and they were very productive. So we have a huge change going on because of what I call the second word, that is the home. And this will impact also the business transportation. So do we need to go to that meeting? Do we need to take a flight? In my case, look at that. I used to travel the whole week. So when I came back to my house on Fridays, I'd love to stay here the whole weekend. Now it changed completely again, because I stay here the whole week and I want to travel on the weekends. So the tourism may catch up back again, because people will change a little bit the way they are used to work with. So now we have the housing business here in Brazil changing a lot. So people giving more value to houses back again and less to the small apartments that were the trend. To live in the center in a small apartment. Now people see that they can live more in nature, more surrounding the cities, because they don't need to go every day to their work anymore. So in terms of management, this will bring for me a huge change. The third word is simplicity. You know, these days here, you know, family just beside us, we can talk, we can see the details, you know, we can have more experience within each other, we can know each other better. And I think we had in our homes a kind of a cleaning everything. Every day here we got one of the rooms and let's clean this, and a lot of things to donation. And I learned that I don't need a lot of things that I used to have. My life will be much more simple from now on. Of course, if you are much more simple, you're not consuming some things that you used to consume. We have to take care about the jobs in this specific area. How are we gonna do this? So we have to think more in the future. How are we going to make working positions for people part-time, giving some income in order to keep society moving? Because we're gonna come out of this crisis much more efficient. I don't have any doubt of this situation in the future. So I'm gonna become much more simple than what I was. So we saw a lot of apps coming, putting people in touch with each other, apps bringing horticultural producers directly selling to supermarkets, where before we had middlemen. So there's a lot of creativity coming towards a much more simple life. The word number 4 is engagement. Engagement. And I think this is such a nice word. We as a society are going to get much more engaged in causes, environmental causes, you know, in communities, in things that are going on, in building up clubs, building up specific interest groups. So this word is very strong, and I think they create a lot of opportunities for companies that are listening to us, because your clients, your consumers will be much more in touch with the company, and you can engage them in your causes. They're going to be evaluating much more and giving this information for free for others. So engagement is important. Number 5 is what I'm calling the neo-collectivism, the emergence of collective actions after this situation will be much more, much faster. So I believe that cooperatives, associations will have much more chance to show their relevance to society, to grow after this situation. So crowdfunding mechanisms, you know, collective movements will gain power with this situation. Then the neo-nationalism. So I see here in Brazil, people starting to value more what is produced here in our country, you know? Well, let's do more tourism here. Let's pick up things from our community, from the surrounding agricultural areas of our city, you know, building direct linkages, engagement, and digital with our farmers. There's a lot of beautiful stories that we can talk here. And I think the locally made, our community, and these kind of things will gain value in what I'm calling the neo-nationalism or neo-regional, whatever you call it. We will value more our community. Infotoxication would be the word number 7, and I'm almost finishing. I know that you're getting tired, but infotoxication is that we are in WhatsApp groups, we are watching TV, and it's, you know, information coming, a lot of them completely toxic, fake news. And I think society during this last 90 days, we learned to be much more selective. You know, I wake up very early, normally 5:30. I make a coffee and start working with the TV on. And suddenly I saw that I was completely intoxicated because it's only disasters. Now I turn on a nice music And I'm there working, relaxing, and just pay attention to some numbers, what is relevant for me. And that's the way we are moving forward. So I think we will be much more selective in filtering what comes to us in terms of information. The number 8 is monitoring. We've been monitored now here in Brazil to see how is our isolation rate. So they get our phones, they measure where we are. You know, in China, they're using a lot of systems that the cameras look for you with your phone. So, you know, we're going to be much more monitored in the future. And I think we will give up part of our privacy in order to have a much safer society. I think if we talk about future, crime will be much more, we will work much more against crime with increasing the risk of you being caught instead of the combating with guns and everything at the moment. So, you know, you've stolen a car here. Okay, that's the satellite sign of your phone. Then you went here. So here we know that's you. So come back here at the police. You're gonna have problems here with us. So, you know, people will start behaving better because there's a kind of a big brother looking to us, looking all over. So I think this is something that will change. I've had a chance to talk a little bit before about the word number 9, which is sanity, hygiene. So we learned much more in this crisis that we need to wash our hands, we need to take care, we need to use masks in some situations, we need to clean, we need to use alcohol, and you know, we learned a lot about hygiene in our society, and we need to improve also the hygiene of our chains, of our systems. So I think hygiene and sanity makes part of our future. The last word is nature. I've never in my life paid so much attention to a tree, to a flower, to an animal. You know, I see the details now, and it's so beautiful. They're surrounding us, but our life was so crazy, you know, taking all these flights and going to airports that you couldn't see the details. They're just surrounding us, so beautiful. So it's a little bit like going back to the, you know, to enjoy your day, to take advantage, to contemplate, to see. And I think this will also change a lot our respect to the environment, the equilibrium of the planet, you know, and this will help us. So these were the 10 words. And now we have 3 very short questions. I don't know how many of our population, how many people will be affected by these 10 words. Second, I don't know if the 10 words will affect them, maybe 2 or 3 or 4. And the third one, I don't know how long these 10 words will stay with us. For me, all of them affected, so 100%, and I think they will stay with me for a long time. The second big discussion that you have to do is do an exercise, putting these 10 words to your business. How my business will be impacted by this new behavior coming in, and we know there's going to be a huge impact. Airline companies, you know, offices, clothing industry, there's going to be a huge new world, totally different new world coming after this moment. So how these kind of changes can affect my business and create opportunities for us. So this was, let's say, my summary, my takeaways of this period, and I think Theo, I'm a better person. Suffered a lot. I'm still suffering, but I think I'm a better person after this tough 75 days already here in Brazil of a different life. I think the coming days will be much better.
And tell me just before we go to questions, how's your? I know that you sometimes refer to your the women in your life as the trade union, and they are pressuring you. How's the trade union functioning in your household?
Well, it's functioning well. It's functioning well. I think I don't have any kind of critics. I think in terms of keeping business moving on, the behavior is okay. There's a kind of a common sense. The problem is more, as I told you, in politics. But when you come to business and health, the idea is the same in our population. So I think even when you see all our institutions, organizations, they're still strong. They're still in the same direction. Of course, we could get rid of the political problem and have a better, let's say, a faster speed of recovery. But the last few days in Brazil were okay. We have the economic situation starting to show some results. So the currency is coming back again. So $1 at the beginning of the crisis, we had $1 valuing 4 reais. It went almost to 6. Now it's coming back and it's close to 5 again. And stock exchange going up. So we started the crisis at 120,000 points. It came to 60, 55, if I remember well. Now it's going back to 80, 83. So, you know, at least we see a situation, Theo, and the government is putting a lot of money. We're going to face some years of the debt of the government will be around 100% of the GDP. So we're going to face some challenges in the future, but the government is putting money in the system to try to keep people breathing and the economy moving. So I'm positive, you know, I'm optimistic. I think we can, if we see if the clouds get out and we manage the virus situation, we can catch up with the economy very fast. This is what I expect and what I support.
Thank you very much, Marcos. Can we have a look? Is there any questions? We can take a few questions. I think, is there any questions? Henry, can you have a look?
I'm just having a look now to see if I can spot anything. We've got a question here from Bobby that asked, what will be the new market for jobs?
Well, thank you for the question. I think it's Robert. Thank you for the question. It's we need maybe more than 1 hour. We need 5 hours to discuss this. Well, first of all, I think the service business will be where we can create jobs, but we see they are very sensitive because when we have a crisis, they disappear. So that's something that we learned from this situation. The service, the countries that have the service businesses, the higher percentage of their GDP are the ones that will fall stronger. But what I think is that some part of our jobs will disappear if these 10 words come strongly to the society. And we will have to be very creative and think about a kind of a minimum income and minimum work for the ones that lost their activities. So this is something that's talking about the future. The ones that are left behind, we will have to see how to employ them and how to give them a monthly support, the very poor. And the employment will not be for the whole week, because there's not going to be, in my perception, amount of work, because we have all the automation coming, the machines and everything. So if I can give one contribution, is that I have to keep that person receive the minimum for survival. I have to give that person education to see if that person can jump and do something new and find the way to get out of the support system. And it should not be for free. So if I'm, as a government, giving some money to this person has to donate 4, 5, 6, or 10 hours a week to the public sector. So they have to help us in cleaning some areas, in building some whatever. I think this will be the future, talking about 5 or 10 years from now, that we have to think about, because they're not going to be jobs for everyone. We need to be creative to create a little bit of occupation and income, and think together in how to get out of this tough situation.
Do you believe, Marcos, that the that the universal credit or basic income will become mainstream politics after this and mainstream economics?
Yes, I will. I do believe in that, and this will benefit the food and agribusiness because, you know, when you receive a voucher and you're very poor, maybe 150% of your voucher will be spent on food. We will have to be much more paying attention to health systems. You know, Brazil has a very good public health system called SUS, the universal system. And now, because it worked well, society is paying attention that we should have it in a good way. So I think we have as a society to pay much more attention to health because people need health and health should be given by the state. We will have this minimum wage, as I told you, and we will have to pay much more attention to the basic public education, the basic system to provide people with the minimum necessary, and the digital will give a revolution in this area. I think if we put digital in the very poor communities, they can have our classes for free, you know, they can learn, they can upload what they have to sell in marketplaces and find people buying directly. So there's a revolution that we can bring to our poverty if we include them in the digital society. So I think this is where we should pay much more attention from now on.
All right. Can we go? I see there is a number of questions in the published side. The whole way that the world is currently going, do you believe that policies will be focused more towards the environment on an international scale? You talked about a personal, but do you expect that we will see stronger international policies towards the environment, and will the focus be more towards trying to create wildlife and the balance between humans and nature?
Theo, I totally agree with you and the one that made the question. As I put, it's the word number 10 is nature, and I think society learned that we don't need a lot of pollution that we are producing, and we can be much more sustainable in our personal behavior, in the way we produce, and in the way we consume. So the answer is yes. As soon as we get rid of the economic crisis, because you know the sustainability triangle, it's people, planet, and profit. If we don't have profit and if we are falling, we cannot sustain people and we cannot sustain the planet. As soon as we get rid of this terrible year where the economy of the world will shrink, I think that the environmental policies will become much more creative, much more present in our lives, and this will create for Africa and for South America and for Brazil a lot of opportunity, because I think agriculture can gain when we have much more environmental controls with the payment for environmental services. Like we have a very strong forestry code here in Brazil that farmers have to follow, but they don't receive any money to set aside. For instance, in my state here, very expensive lands, the forestry code obliges you to set aside 20% of your land and recover with the original forest that we had here, the original vegetation. But the farmers are not receiving for that. And as soon as we have more these markets working, I think the carbon markets in our future and the payment for environmental services will be a promising area to study and to work with.
Marcos, this is now, since you are involved in a bit of the modeling in your where you live, do you have any idea or view, because South Africa is behind Brazil in terms of the virus, do you have any idea when do you think it will peak in Brazil, or is there no consensus on that in terms of modeling?
I think we are still, let's say, if you put, again, you have to put the country in an average, because probably here we already had, we are stable. The state of São Paulo is relatively stable, but the poor areas of Brazil are still going up. So this is why Brazil is going up. So if you separate the states that are well organized here in Brazil, they're bringing the average down, and then you have the ones that are disaster that are bringing the average up. But I think we still have, it depends a lot in several data still to come, but I think we still have around 20-30 days to reach, as an average, the peak of the country, and then I hope and I pray start going down. So what we have to do now is be rational and see, again, I will come back, and if there's a message that I can give to South Africa is put the economy also in the equation. Because, you know, when we talk about doctors, and I love them, they make part of the committee that I participate, I look as idols to them, but they want to shut down the country until December. That's the best to do, of course, to save lives, but then we don't have anything standing up, and then we die everyone next year. All the population will die. So we have to be very creative to bring up an equilibrium. And I think if I can give a contribution, since South Africa is a little bit delayed from us here, you started after the isolation process, is do these metrics of the impact towards the economy, because you still need GDP, you need income to distribute next year or the second semester, and the risk to of contamination. Activities that have low risk, you can control people, you have to use masks, you oblige the company to put the sanitizer, all types of controls, they should come back, because we have to look after the crisis. And it doesn't, we can create a bigger humanitarian problem after, if we miss the right equation now.
Marcos, thank you very much. I think that's about an hour. Roelf, it's up to you to thank you, Marcos. I think that was absolutely brilliant. Obviously, you have no plans when you're back in South Africa, but I owe you a nice Bonsmara steak and a bottle of red wine when you're back in South Africa.
Yeah, Professor Neves, from my side, I can only reiterate your point on digital. I'm sitting in Cape Town, Theo and George in Johannesburg, yourself in Brazil, and our participants are scattered all over South Africa, Namibia, and the US. Yeah, thank you for an informative talk, and we appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us. As you rightly mentioned, we receive a lot of news update from the progress of COVID in your country. As South Africans, we share your concern and we wish you good health and all the best. Theo, as Professor Marcos Neves mentioned, we receive a lot of information on a daily basis, and over the last 9 weeks, you helped us to filter the information and assist us to cut through the noise and listen to what is relevant and important. We know in order for you to brief us on a weekly basis, it takes a lot of hours, a lot of preparation, and obviously careful consideration, and we appreciate this. Thank you. I mentioned previously, we've always been impressed by the way in which you share your knowledge and years of experience freely with all who asked. And over the last 9 weeks, I learned from you the valuable principle of we all now need not to cast not only our bread on the waters, but our bakery. Theo, thank you.
It's a big pleasure, Marcos, from my side. All the best. And I hope to see you in South Africa soon, and we can have that bottle of red wine.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for everyone that participated. We appreciate, and we'll send the recording as soon as we have edited and settled same. And we'll also distribute next week's session, which is on the 4th of June next. Yeah, thank you and goodbye.